Okay, hey class. All right, so welcome to week 6. This week we're going to get into some media relations, which is oftentimes the entry level position for a lot of communication scholars when they go to work in kind of corporate settings and stuff like that. Media relations is something that you mostly do in public relations, but you'd also do it in marketing. You also do it in advertising to a certain extent. But you'll see why it pertains mostly to public relations. But what we do in media relations and what communications, how it's involved is media relations is knowing everything about the industry in which your clients, if you work for an agency or the company that you work for, if you're positioning yourself as working for a company, you want to know what's going on in their industry at all times. In order to do this, you have to keep up with the media, which means reading all of the things that are going on around that particular topic, industry, different trends, and things like that. Now, if our job is to get out as much information as we can to the public for as little money as possible, which really is the goal of any type of mass communication. Remember, communicating across large amounts of people is very expensive to do, right? Literally every letter costs money and everything else, right? So we want to make sure that we're using our money as effectively. But also, we know that there are lots of ways to get into the press for free, right? Without having to actually pay for an advertisement. And this is media relations. This is public relations, and what entry-level public relations people tend to do is they build up media relations. And the way in which you begin, the very first place you start, is with a media pitch. A media pitch is a demonstration to a journalist, a specific journalist, or a group of journalists, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you're setting up a pitch that you're sending to them that is reflective of your company or your client as having to do with this trend that they're talking about or should be. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, if you look at newspapers like the New York Times or China Daily News or something like that, what you will find is that newspapers have sections, right? So they have science section maybe, and a business section, finance, lifestyle, right? And then, on the front page is the news. But throughout, we have different sections. And so we actually have journalists and columnists and contributors and bloggers and lots of people who write professionally for the media, for publications, and for, other website, magazine, or newspaper publications. Each one of those being a tier of sophistication and credibility. Newspapers the highest, magazine second, web and blogging and things like that the third. Excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. So we have these different tiers, right, of, sophistication. And what we mean by sophistication really is the credibility that you gain from that. If your client is being interviewed in the New York Times or China Daily News, that's much more important and seen by many more people than if they are being interviewed by somebody from a local blog, that has to do with technology or whatever it is you're talking about. All right, so to give you an example of of how this works, every journalist in America or in China and everywhere else in the entire world, anywhere where you find a journalist, they're doing the same thing, which is trying to get as much information as possible. They're trying to get as much credibility as possible for all of their stories. Now, if you're dealing with, crime or politics or something serious, then, you need to go do investigative journalism, right? But a lot of what we see in newspapers and different websites, and I apologize if you hear my dogs are very excited for some reason, but a lot of what we hear and see on the web and in different forms of news is that we tend to see that what they're talking about are trends, right? And that we're making projections of the future. So there isn't a lot of things that we can investigate and speak of definitively. Instead, what we look for, and what most articles in this type of genre, which is business really, are written about, is projections of what the future looks like because of a trend. And in order to make a projection about the future of a trend and what that looks like, your source needs to be highly credible in order for people to believe them. Who are credible sources? Experts. So, in media relations, you can assume that, let's say you work for Apple, right? And let's say that Samsung has created a new technology that's revolutionizing cell phones, right? It's the greatest camera ever. It's a million times better than any other camera that's ever been used in cell phones before. If you're Apple and you didn't create this technology, you're already behind your competition in Samsung, right? Now they look like they're the innovators and they're super smart and da 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 da. So you may want to then, as a part of the public relations, because Apple is very, very famous and they're kind of the gold standard of cell phone production and what people want, right? And so if Samsung has this all of a sudden advantage with this camera, you need to go into public relations mode where you need to get your company being talked about, because everybody in your world, in your industry, all of the reporters, all the bloggers, everybody who usually is talking about Apple is now talking about Samsung. So how do you get them back? You do this through media relations. You call if you have close contacts, if you've built up relationships with journalists, and believe me, people have. But also, if you're Apple, people are going to want to talk to you because you actually have experts. Even though you didn't build this technology and you didn't create this camera, you can talk about maybe even why Apple's not focusing on cameras because you think, there's another technology that will supersede it. Or Apple is instead focusing on this, that, or the other thing. Or what are the implications for this really new cool camera that they have? And, how will Apple probably improve upon it or something like that, right? But what you would be doing is you would be assuming, rightfully so, that all of the journalists in the tech space are talking about this Samsung's new camera. And because they want to talk to, everyone wants to talk to Samsung. But Samsung's only going to talk to the very top tier. They're going to say, okay, LA Times, okay, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, China Daily News, we'll talk to you. Nobody else, right? Everybody else can find their own guys. So then every other newspaper, magazine, and source in all of America and all over the world is looking for experts that are going to comment on this, but they're not going to get access to Samsung. So you, as a media relations person working for Apple, your job would be to know the second that camera came out, because you'd constantly be reading news and finding new trends as part of your job. And then and you would have alerts for like new technology alerts and cell phone and Samsung. You would have these programmed into your Google or Bing or whatever search results, and you would be notified anytime something like this happens so that you could stay on top of every trend that is happening in your industry. This is your job. So for those of you who hate doing research into companies, media relations and public relations is probably not a good avenue for you. But if you enjoy this, this can be a very lucrative and exciting place to work because you're always on top of what's new. And then once you've identified this and you realize, oh my goodness, Bob, our chief information officer, is would be a great resource. And I have a contact at the New York Times that I can give a call to, and I can probably send them a pitch about what's going on and they'll respond, right? And so what a pitch is, a media pitch, is you inserting your expert, your client, right? And for your homework assignment, which I'll talk about in a second, you will choose a specific title that makes sense for what it is that you're pitching, which you may have to do a little bit of research on, who would actually be and, what would their title be in a company, right? Because across every company, it's basically the same. You have your CEO or Chief Executive Officer, your CFO, Chief Financial Officer, CIO, Chief Information Officer, COO, Chief Operations Officer, CLO, Chief Logistics Operator, Officer. So any of those titles and things like that, you want to make sure that you have, right? So you actually have, you've got until until all of this week to just do essentially write, what will amount to about 6 lines of text, right? Pitches are very, very small. And I've given you a resource that shows you exactly how to write a pitch. And they have to be short. The quickest way to lose points on this assignment is to make your pitch long, all right? But what your pitch is a way in which to grab the attention of a journalist to get them to give you a free advertisement, making you look really smart because you're getting interviewed, you're getting your company's executives or someone interviewed as though they are in fact an expert, because they are, if the journalist wants them, right? So how do you position this? Now, you can even do this if the journalists don't know who your company are, but you need to then talk about why your particular expert is so qualified. But if you have a big brand name that everybody knows, you can just say, I can make available our chief information officer from Apple, Bob Smith or whatever, or whatever her name is, that, and find that out, use the actual person's name. But you can make them available for interview or whatever. Now, what you're offering is a benefit to the journalist and a benefit to you. All right. So this is what we call a quid pro quo, or, you get something, I get something, right? So the journalist, instead of having to go and call a bunch of different places and find an expert, gets an expert. And then you get your expert instead of somebody else getting getting their expert, right? And if you're Apple, you don't want Microsoft to get their expert, you want theirs in, right? And what this does is, when the people who read this journalist all the time looking for tech news, when they read about this new trend from their favorite source, they're going to get your expert. So even though Samsung created the camera, and that's what they're talking about, your expert is going to talk about why that technology doesn't necessarily matter, or why something better is on the way, or whatever else it is. And then you remain in the, I guess, the sphere of media, right, in the world of business, and how people speak about you and how your reputation is perceived by the general public. You remain an innovator despite the fact that you didn't do anything, and actually your competition is, catching up, or has gone, has created something new. All right. But oftentimes it won't be a competitor. It could just be something new that was invented, right? And that it's a new technology that not many people know about. And so no company is really positioned to speak expertly about it. So then you can offer up your experts that are in related or close fields. For instance, there is no expert on communicating with alien life, all right? There are people who may think they're an expert of alien life, but until we have alien life and alien life needs to communicate with us, we don't have anybody that is an expert in doing that, right? So who would I want to, talk about? If I was writing an article, we find out there's alien life, they want to communicate with us, and then everyone's writing, all kinds of news articles about this. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to look for what types of experts? They're going to look for linguists. They're going to look for astrophysicists. They're going to look for physicists. They're going to look for, maybe psychics or the religious, who knows, right? But they're going to find experts from lots and lots of different places, because whenever we do have a trend, or whenever we have an event, or whenever we have something that is newsworthy, we have tremendous amount of different angles, and your industry may have a different angle on this, right? So for instance, if let's say that there's a new technology that makes plastic, very, very, very inexpensive and biodegradable and safe, right? That's amazing. That's wonderful. Except for the companies who make plastic currently the way that they do. Those companies are in very, very big trouble, right? They would probably start to talk, their media relations people would be saying, hold on, we don't know the long-term effects of this new particular plastic and how it breaks down. Plastic has been involved with, such and such society for years. It's, plastic accounts for X amount of jobs around the world. If we just suddenly shift over to this new plastic, we're going to have, the entire world, or, but what I'm saying is that there are different angles that we can find in the ways in which a trend affects us. So what may be good for one industry might be terribly bad for another. What may be a very awesome, interesting technology for one may be a very disruptive and destructive technology for another industry. And so we also want to understand, that not everything is good, right? That, okay, if there's a new plastic that eats up all of the, or that biodegrades and leaves no carbon footprint, that's amazing. But the reality is that we still have a tremendous amount of plastic. And if we have this new plastic that everybody's going to want, suddenly everyone is going to throw away every single previous piece of plastic that they have in their home, right? Or at work or everywhere else. And now we're going to be flooded with this massive increase of plastic, which could end up in the ocean and landfills. And how do we dispose of this stuff, right? So there's always something. It's never always just positive. So if you are going to, you know, understand how this affects, and you want to make sure that you are getting across, you know, whatever point to the journalist that you're reaching out to. You want to make sure that you can demonstrate that you really do understand what you're talking about. And so in order to do that, and what you will have to do for your homework, is you're going to have to find some trends, and you're going to have to find some articles, and then you're going to have to find some other ones to give us some new perspective. All right. So I've given you a homework assignment to create a media pitch, and I've told you introductory here as to what a media pitch is and how it works. And we'll talk a little bit more in our live class session tomorrow as well. But real quick, what I want you to understand about your homework is because no one's watching the videos, you're no longer getting the long homework descriptions. You're going to have to watch the videos to get your description for your homework and come to the class sessions and actually pay attention. So what I've said so far is that, you know, you will create a media pitch based on an industry trend and position your organization with one of its executives as an expert on that trend and offer to create an article for them. So oftentimes in media relations, you'll reach out to one journalist, or maybe you can send as many as 30,000 or the same pitch to 30,000 journalists across the entire world instantaneously, which you can do. They all receive it. There might be 100 of them that are working on a story related to you that want to speak to your expert. 100 of them email you back. You say, "Oh, look at this. This is New York Times. I'll respond to this one. Here's the, you know, Harvard Business Review. Great." Or, you know, this, whatever it is, right? So whichever media outlet is interested in you, you choose your favorite ones and you give them priority. And then when you respond to them because they're interested in your pitch, and in your initial pitch, you should build this in as well. You're not just offering to do an interview with your expert, you're also offering to write the entire article for them yourself. And as scary as this may seem, and as shocking as this may seem to some of the world, a lot of what you find in the business press has actually been written by what they call a contributor. And a contributor is that company, whoever is featured in that article, their public relations team actually wrote the entire article. And then the journalist edited it, looked over, made sure that it wasn't too leaning in one direction, or perhaps changed nothing about it at all whatsoever, depending upon the credibility of the publication. And they just publish it as is, as though it was something that you know, that came from the Wall Street Journal. But in all honesty, it just came straight from Google themselves, or from Microsoft, or, you know, whoever else it is, right? So that's what media relations is. And if you can think about that, one, it's free, other than having to pay for media relations specialists. Two, you're seen as highly credible, and you get, you know, yourself positioned quite well in front of the media. But most importantly, you're controlling the message about how the media speaks about you. So the companies who are big and are really, really good at this, they control their own narrative through media relations. And this is how it happens. A company like Google probably has somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50 media relations specialists per country, maybe even more than that. They could have thousands of people who do nothing but just read all of the tech news that exists all of the time, and the social news. I mean, not just tech, but, you know, Google is involved in a lot of different areas. But anything, we call these touch points, any industry, anything product interesting that might have to do with that company, you need to know about. And once you know about it, right now, you guys don't need to for this class, but as a media relations specialist or someone working in public relations, advertising, or marketing, you have to know, you have to have your, what they say, your hand on the pulse of the industry. You have to be knowing what's innovative, what's new, and what are people talking about. And then, and by people, I mean the newspapers, the magazines, the trade magazines, what are they talking about? And then, are they talking about you when they talk about that? Because that's the goal. And so you'll see in the instructions, or the supplemental material that I've given you, the website to take a look at, that lays out some really great steps. Now, about that particular website, I do not want you including an image attached to your pitch, okay? There's one of the things it says to do in there is that you can do that. I do not want you to do that for this class at all whatsoever. That's a very rare thing. It's a highly specific time where you would send someone a photograph. It's kind of an older thing. But other than that, it's a good resource, and make sure that you read it and take a look at it. There's also some links in there that get you a little bit of a deeper dive. All right. If you have questions, comments, or concerns about this video, do reach out. Otherwise, or you can ask them tomorrow during our live session as well. Otherwise, I assume you know what we're doing, and I'll see you tomorrow in class. All right, everyone. Have a great night.